Preventive controls. What is PCHF? Preventive Controls for Human Food. From FSMA, Food Safety Modernization ACT, enacted in 2011. FDA announced PCHF for the food industry on September 17, 2015. Requires food manufacturing, processing, packing and storage facilities to identify food safety and adulteration hazards associated with their foods and processes. Implement controls to minimize hazards. Verify controls are working. Design and implement corrective actions to address any deviations that might arise. Requires food manufacturing, processing, packing and storage facilities to identify food safety and adulteration hazards associated with their foods and processes. Implement controls to minimize hazards. Verify controls are working. Design and implement corrective actions to address any deviations that might arise. Major task to comply with PCHF. Conduct hazard analysis. Risk-based preventive controls. Monitoring the effectiveness. Corrective actions. Verification. Supply chain program. Record-keeping and documentation. Requirement to reanalyze. 1. Conduct hazard analysis. Identifies hazards due to the specific foods or food ingredients in the food or due to the various processing, manufacturing, packing, and holding steps applied to the food. Once hazard is identified, we must evaluate the hazard to assess the probability of it occurring, the severity of the injury it would bring. This step is designed to prepare the firm for identifying steps necessary to minimize or prevent the hazards from arising. To identify hazards, we must consider known or reasonably foreseeable hazards. Biological hazards, bacteria, viruses, parasites. Chemical hazards, cleaners, lubricants, hydraulic fluids, coolants. Physical hazards, naturally occurring hazards or unintentionally introduced hazards. Intentionally introduced hazards for economic gains. After identifying the hazards, each hazard is evaluated by considering formulation, facilities, equipment, production flow, storage, and transportation. The company must also look into relevant factors that could contribute to each hazard throughout the food facility, its operations and personnel, the entire supply chain, raw materials, packaging, labels, etc., and the foods received, delivered and shipped. 2. Risk-based preventive controls. Requires the development and implementation of risk-based controls to minimize or prevent identified hazards to ensure the safety of the food we process, hold, and distribute. Controls are designated at certain steps in the process to minimize the identified hazards, especially critical control points. Critical control points are points in the process in which a measurement can be taken to decide whether the product is acceptable or not. Examples of preventive controls: sanitation procedures, equipment, food contact surfaces, and utensils. Staff hygiene training, recall plan, GMPs, supply chain controls. 3. Monitoring the effectiveness. PCHF requires the food facility to establish and implement a written monitoring program, which ensures the firm is conducting regular evaluations of the facility's control measures to determine that the preventive controls are working. FDA will evaluate the firm's monitoring system to identify inadequacies in either the methods of monitoring or the firm's record keeping. 4. Corrective actions. Corrective actions are put into place in the case of preventive controls not being properly implemented. Questions regarding preventive controls or the food safety plan's effectiveness. Records are incomplete, or other discrepancies in implementing the food safety plan. Corrective actions include the following steps: identification of weak spots and ineffectiveness of controls, identification of new hazards, performing necessary steps to reduce likelihood of new occurrence, evaluating packaged product before shipment, prevention of adulterated food from entering the facility. 5. Verification. PCHF requires the design and implementation of verification steps to ensure the PCHF plan is operating correctly to prevent or minimize food safety and adulteration hazards. Verification steps should be sufficient enough to show that the preventive controls are adequate, monitoring is occurring properly as defined in procedures, appropriate corrective actions are taken, Potential food hazards are reduced. Annual reviews are conducting to recognize the case of any new hazards. 6. Supply chain program. A risk-based supply chain program is implemented in our program to make sure that the relevant hazards are controlled by suppliers and third-party entities. How we do that? Identification of used suppliers, determining and conducting supplier verification activities, conducting other facility, non-supplier, controls of hazards, or reviewing another entity's verification activities on the hazards. 7. Record-keeping and documentation. Previously, under the Bioterrorism Act, the FDA could only require a food company that enabled food to be traced through the supply chain up to a year. Now, PCHF and the supply chain provisions under FSMA require that records and documents related to food hazards and process control systems be established and maintained for no less than 2 years to cover the following PCHF steps: the monitoring of controls and corrective actions, testing steps and other verification steps designed to ensure preventive controls are effectively minimizing or preventing hazards. Supply chain program. Trainings. 8. Requirement to reanalyze. After developing and implementing an adequate PCHF plan, the food facility must periodically evaluate its food safety system. Additionally, PCHF requires the facility to perform a new hazard analysis and implement any new, necessary preventive controls before operational changes occur. Any changes must be documented in the firm's PCHF records. If no changes are necessary after a reanalysis of a PCHF system, the firm must document the basis for that decision. Questions?